Today we're going to start out with a little bit more advanced shading techniques, kind of like what we did with the sphere a while back. Usually when we use our pencil, we use it to write our names. So we hold our pencil like this. Let's put Mr. G like that. But for shading, what we want to do is we want to have a different grip on our pencil, kind of like this, with your finger and your thumb like that and just gripping it, whatever's comfortable, so that the side of the pencil is what you're really using. And you want to just lightly lay it down on the paper, really kind of slowly and moving forward, backward and forward, mostly in one direction, like I mentioned earlier, like a printer kind of does. Goes back and forth, and lays as even of a layer of pencil as we can, because this is the beginning of doing shading, adding shadow to our drawings. So it's good to experiment. It's good to just practice with that. Because if we use a tighter grip like this, it's harder to get a more even surface. So that's why we want to put our hands a little bit further down and just layer it out very smoothly, as smooth as we can. So we're going to draw a square. So just draw a square. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is not really about perfect shapes or anything today. This is more about your shading technique. Because if you get this down, your drawings will become much more realistic. So what we want to do is we want to start very, very lightly, and we're going to move down like a printer. And as we move down, like a printer does, we're going to push down a little bit harder as we go down. And by the end of the square, you get something a little bit darker. And if it doesn't end up, then we're going to do another square. And we're going to do just the opposite. This is a good practice. You can do this over and over again. The more you do it, the better practice you get, the better that you get at it. So we're going to start dark this time, kind of press down that pencil a little bit harder. And then as we go down, we're going to lift up just a little bit. And what we're doing is we're making a gradient. We talked about that earlier in class. It's a gradation from dark to light. And this is good practice to start doing shadows and creating different tonal values. You can also do this with a colored pencil. So when you go home, if you want to practice doing this with a colored pencil, you can do it as well. So it doesn't just have to be pencil, but pencil is great for doing what we're going to be doing as far as finishing our portraits at the end of the year, because we won't be doing those with colored pencil. They won't look as realistic. So I'm just doing it with a green colored pencil here, and starting from light to dark this time. Obviously we're speeding this up. So I want you to take just a minute to do that, and then we'll move on to the next part. We're going to try to do a cylinder. If you guys remember doing a cylinder, just an oval on the top and a little smile at the bottom. And then we're just going to shade on the left side, because we're going to imagine that the shadow or the light is coming from the right side. So if the light is coming from the right side, we're going to shade on the left side. That's where we're going to add the shadow, the darkest tone anyways. So you can just take your pencils and just very lightly kind of try to do this side in. If you go over the line, it's perfectly fine, because this is pencil and we can use eraser. That is the beauty of pencil. And then if you want to turn your pencil a little bit more, I talked about doing some cross hatching. You can do that as well. And it helps darken the side. So as we go from one side to the other, it goes from light to dark. Just like we're doing from light to dark. And then from this side, we can do dark to light. I'm just adding some really light darks in there. And now we can take our blending tortillon and we can smooth those lines out. Make it look a little bit more realistic. And just blend that tone in, and it still goes from dark to light. Remember we did a sphere earlier in the year? We just did a circle, and the light was coming from the right side. So we just drew a little circle, and then we kind of filled in the left side. It's the same idea with the cylinder. With the sphere, you kind of have a bit of a curved gradation, almost like a moon shape, if you remember that. This is just doing it on a smaller scale. It makes it a lot easier to do too. You're not filling in so much space. But it's good practice to get that gradation. I can even put a shadow underneath here. Just to show that the light is coming from the right and the shadow goes off to the left. Now we can try a different cylinder. But let's do one that's kind of curved, not just a straightforward cylinder. Once again, this isn't about the shape so much as it is about the shading. So I'm going to make just a curved cylinder. You can almost imagine that that is an arm or something as we're shading, because when people do figure drawings, basically they're making shapes a little bit more realistic, but they're still adding the same kind of shading. So that's why we would try something like this. You might notice that I'm going over the line, maybe by accident, but I can always erase that line later because it's not too dark. I always like to go over to the line side on the left and darken that in a little bit more. Because as you go from one side to the other, from the light side to the dark, it's always going to get a little bit darker. Those are good things to practice. And then you can take your blending stump and just smooth that in. You'll start to notice that this doesn't take very long at all, especially when you're working with small objects that you're drawing. So it's good practice. You can also do this with color. Just add a little shadow to that to give it some depth. But you can do this with color as well. And try to do something even a little bit more curved. That almost looks more like an arm or an elbow. You guys don't have to do the color, but you can do that at home. Here's another example of a cylinder, more like a glass, really. I went outside the line, so I erased them. The important thing to note that while you're drawing these cylinders, they don't have to be perfect. I mean, maybe your cylinder looks a little bit more like this, or it's not perfect. But that's really not what this is about. This is more about shading right now. It's more about learning that technique. So more about hugging up to that line that's on the left side there and trying to get a good gradation in there, trying to get some good shadow. So you can even try a filling technique like this where you're kind of filling in the glass and then you kind of move over to the left side a little bit more and get it a little bit darker. I like to take my pencil and put it on the left side like this. Notice that I went over the line again, and that's okay because we have pencils, and pencils have erasers. And we use erasers to erase over that line too. So we'll take care of that in a minute. So even if your cylinder is not perfect, it's still going to look more realistic. So then we'll erase the lines on the outside. Get that blending tortillon in there. Smooth that gradation out. It almost looks like a jar, maybe a clay jar that somebody made. I'm going to add a little bit of a highlight in there with my eraser. Now I want you to go to another space on your paper and just make a kind of a curved line. Doesn't have to be perfect, but just kind of a curved line without any bumps. Just a nice, maybe a half, just the end of a ball probably. Just like that. Doesn't have to be perfect. Just a nice little curved line. And then we're going to practice doing kind of a gradation again from the line going out. So dark on the left side, right next to the line, just like we've been doing. And then I want you to go out from there. We're making it a little bit lighter as we go along. Make sure you have the correct grip on your pencil, like I have here. We're using the side of the pencil as we do this. Very lightly just going over it, because the lighter you go, the less graphite gets onto the paper. And you can always add more. Harder to take away unless you use an eraser. So we're trying to get a nice smooth gradation from dark to light. And notice the line here. What our goal is to make that line disappear. And all you see is all of a sudden just a nice dark to light without a line. So I'm trying to make that line disappear. And the reason I do that is when you look at nature, when you look at different things around you, there's not an actual line drawn around those things. There's just usually a separation, like a negative space, which you can see we have here. If you remember us doing our negative space drawings last time we were together. So the negative space is on the left side right now, and we're working on a solid object. You take our blending tortilla or your cotton swab, your Q-tip, or even a piece of paper towel, put it on your finger and smooth it out. This is a wonderful exercise in just practicing to get better at shading, where you'll be able to make things look more realistic. Now, we're going to move on and try something new. We're going to make just a line. I kind of think of this as like the side of a face, maybe. It doesn't really have to be that, but one with not too many lines, just a nice maybe one or two little divots in there, and then do the exact same thing that we've been doing, shading from dark to light. Follow that line all the way up. Makes it a little bit harder when we start dealing with more lines or more curves in our lines. But it's very true to reality too. And it's kind of fun to imagine what this line might be. You can see I made a little mistake there. I can always take that out with my eraser afterwards. You can see once again we're creating this negative space on the left side where the white is, and we're creating a solid object where we're shading. Now I gotta take care of that little spot right there. Now let's take my blending tortilla, my blending stump, or your Q-tip, paper towel. Go right along that line to kind of smooth that line out first. Notice that the line that we first created here completely disappeared. When we work on faces, there won't be a line on the outside of your face because we'll have some shading going on there, just like this. Now we're going to try to add a few more curves and edges into our lines after this. So just kind of let your pencil flow for the next one. Before I do, I'm going to add just a little bit more shadow to this edge. This is where we're going to do a little bit more lines. Maybe just like a nice little curved ribbon line. Maybe about 2 or 3, 4 hills. And then once again, I'm going to start from the left side there. And we're just going to shade in this side too. We're going to try something different with this one. We're still going to do the same shading technique, but we're going to add something this time. And you'll see how that works to give it more depth. Keep doing the left side. We're going to fill this in. Once again, it's going to be a little bit more difficult because we have some curves, we've got some hills and dips in there. But this is a good practice to get used to those areas of doing that. Then I'm going to get next to that line and darken it up a little bit more. It's important to look at your drawing, kind of the whole thing, and see if you've done the gradation pretty evenly across. Now we're going to go very, very lightly, and we're going to go on to the other side. So we're going to just take our pencil at the very lightest that it can be and add some shading there. Holding the pencil just exactly the same. That will ensure that you are getting more of an even layer of graphite onto the paper. I want you to notice that on the right side it's much darker. And that's kind of what we're going for. We're not going for a negative space here this time because there is a solid mass on the left side too. So we'll just fill this side in, add a little bit more of a gradation in there, a little bit more of a solid color, if you will. I'm going to take my blending tortillon and do exactly what we did before. Smooth that gradation out. And you may notice as you're drawing that you're creating the illusion of depth. One side there's light, one side there's dark. So it may look to you as if the middle line is coming right towards you. Now we will shade the other side. I'm using Q-tip this time, in case we don't have all blending tortillons, just to show you that Q-tips work just as well as the blending tortillons. So you might imagine that this is like the fold of a drape, fold of some clothing. This is what it takes to create the illusion of a fold somewhere, perhaps in clothing or fabric. And then if you want to highlight that a little bit more, make it a little bit more deep or standing out a little bit more, you can use your eraser. So let's take my eraser and just kind of glide down the top of the left side there. That's where it's a little bit lighter. Left side of that line, and you can see it might be just kind of popping out even a little bit more. Maybe it looks like a clamshell, something like that. Or a line, maybe even a snake. Again, the ultimate goal of all of this is to teach you about advanced shading techniques. Now we're going to make kind of a zigzag line. So all of our lines are going to be straight and sharp. They don't have to be perfectly straight, but just kind of sharp with no curves in it. And do the same thing that we've been doing. Once again, shading. This is a good practice for our right-handers. The right side of the line works the best, I think, when you're practicing. And then you left-handers can probably try from the other side, and it might work better for you to hold your pencil like that. And I'm just going to go and see if you notice right now we're not taking the gradation all the way out. We're trying something new where we're just kind of going out about a half an inch away from the line. Still doing the gradation. We're still making that line kind of disappear as we do it. And then this time on the right side, we're going to add a little bit more shadow, a little bit more color, even though it's not a color. If this was a black and white photograph of something, like say that line is green and red, but it's black and white photograph, it still has this tone to it. Now I'm going to take just a little bit more of the pencil and try to do a lighter gradation. And you'll see why we're doing this in just a moment. We'll take our blending stump, blend it together. I always think it's one of the most satisfying things that once you've laid down some pencil like that, to take that blending tortillon, the blending stump, and just smooth that out. It's almost like just fixing everything. Now as you look, you might notice that your eyes might be playing tricks on you as to what part of the object that you're drawing is standing out. Is it going up? Is it going down? Kind of like the M.C. Escher illusion pictures that I showed you last time. He's the guy that did all the cool negative space drawings where the ducks turned into fish. I'm going to take an eraser and actually make a line that kind of follows that other line, just like that. Now you can try to figure out which side is sticking out. Might even go on the other side of this eraser line that we just made. Add a really nice light gradation there. And it can almost act as a shadow within an object. We've added a little bit of shadow when we did our neurographic drawings a couple times ago. Add a little bit of shadow to our color drawings. We'll just smooth out this side. And that is that section. I noticed that there's a little bit of corners in here, so I thought it'd be kind of neat to put a little light line in between. And just play around some more. Most of the time when I've been doing this, I've been just kind of playing around because it's really about this learning how to do the gradation from light to dark or dark to light, whichever way you're working. And the more you do that, the better that you get at it. And the more you see how different objects have this in reality. So now we're going to try one last exercise. You can try this if you'd like. We'll work on some other ones that you just make up on your own, because this one was a little bit more complicated. I'm just starting from the middle and making some curved lines, maybe like folds of clothing, and then I'm going to connect the tops. Not in any particular order, maybe like they were flower petals or something like that. And then from any direction, just connect. Since we're not really drawing anything in particular, it doesn't have to be perfect in any way. Now I'm just going to choose one of the lines and add a gradation shadow. I'm going to go from dark to light. Try to fill the whole thing up this time, because it is a solid object. On the outside, we'll have negative space, and on the inside, we'll have a solid object with shadow, with tone. You can go to the next line, darken that out. These are all real nonsensical objects where you look at it and you can't really tell what it is, but you're just practicing. Kind of how when you take some paints and you add different colors together just to see what happens. With your paintbrush, you can put down some blue and you can put down some yellow and mix them together, and all of a sudden green appears. And that's kind of the way it is when you're doing shading like this, with nonsensical objects, objects that you don't really know what they are. Different things pop out at you, different optical illusions will pop out. And then you can think to yourself, well, that's how you create that. Maybe you're drawing somebody's brooch, something that they're wearing, like a piece of jewelry, or a flower, and you're trying to figure out how to do that. And then when you look at the object, you notice that it's darker here and then lighter in this section. And now doing this, you kind of know how to do that, how to make it go from light to dark more realistically. I'm going to speed this up a little. Now we'll take the blending tortillon, blending stump, blender, and blend all those together. And I'll take the eraser and make some highlights. The opposite side of the shadow eraser. Now you'll see wherever we started our dark line, just on the opposite side of it, we'll put a little light line. And you can see how much it pops out. And since this is all just practice, you can go as long as you want to with changes here and there. Add some darker lines if you'd like to, or just be done with that. And take those lines that they started off with, and maybe add a little bit darker lines. Add just a little bit more depth to this object.